Well, this is my new 2024 Kawasaki Eliminator. It just came out this year, but it's not the first year that Kawasaki has used the Eliminator name. They started back in 1985, and they made several different models. The first one was 1000cc, and they called it a drag bike. And over the years, they made, I don't know, several different models, but most of them weren't sold in the United States. They also made a 250 Eliminator. But now they brought the name back again, and we've got this white one, or they make another one that's called, I think, Ghost Gray. But I had a choice between the two. They had both of them in stock. Neither one of them had ABS on. They had sold all their ABS models. So I bought this white one, which white is my favorite color, next to yellow. And so I've always wanted a white motorcycle, and so now I have one. It has a 3.34 gallon tank. 0.85 of that is reserve. It gets, depending on how you drive it, if you are running down the interstate at 80 miles an hour, it's only going to get about 82, 83 miles to a gallon. If you're riding around backcountry roads, 55, 50 miles an hour, it's going to get as much as 88 miles to a gallon. So most of the roads I ride around here are a little combination of highway and backcountry roads. So I average in the mid-80s most of the time, which is a lot better than my Kawasaki Versys X300. That twin-cylinder engine, 300cc approximately, was a high-revving engine, and they didn't get very good gas mileage. I was lucky if I could get about 61, 62 miles to a gallon with it on its best day. I almost never got better than that. I may have seen mid-60s, but most of the time, every time I gassed up, even running around on these country roads at 50 miles an hour, I was still only getting about 61 miles to a gallon with it most of the time. I did get tired of that screaming Ninja engine, and so I decided that even though I liked the way the bike fit me, it was one of the better fitting bikes that I had, and I liked a lot of the features on it, but I just got real tired of that high RPM engine. It was an underpowered bike, and it didn't reach its peak horsepower until it got up to 10,000, 11,000 RPM torque and horsepower. You had to get pretty high in the RPM range to get your power out of it, and it took a long time to get to that high RPM range. Now, as an alternative, I also have a Honda CB300R, which I took in trade on my Honda CB500X. This is a 2019 model, so it lacks the gear indicator and emergency flashers, but it's a nice bike. And this 300 engine, compared to the Kawasaki Versys 300X, has a lot more power, because it develops its power on the low end, and you'll get to speed a whole lot quicker than you could ever do that on the Versys. So this is a much better 300 engine. So this bike has got the Ninja 400 engine in it. Now, you know what my complaints about putting Ninja engines in these road bikes are, if you're not going to race them, if they're not a race bike, is that they run at a high RPM all the time. They're just constantly screaming, and it takes a long time to get into the power band. But what they did with this was they took the Ninja 400 engine, and then they increased the stroke. So that made it a 451cc engine. That gave you low end and mid-range torque. So it's a much smoother engine, runs at a lower RPM, much quieter, easier to ride. And it was such a great idea. I don't know why they didn't catch on to that and do the same thing to the 300 engine in the Versys X300. If they would increase the stroke on that, it would make it more of an adventure bike, which is what it's supposed to be. Because with that high RPM engine, it just really didn't have enough power running low RPMs on the trails off-road. So they really need to do something different. I know everybody's been complaining that they want to put the 400 Ninja engine in the Versys, but that won't solve the problem. First of all, it won't fit in that frame, so they'd have to design a whole new frame. And that would get pretty costly, and the cost of the Versys X300 and the KLR 650 is already too close. So I assume that's why they're not putting more money in it to develop a new frame and put the 400 engine in it. However, that 400 engine wouldn't really help much for a street bike and an off-road bike, for cruising long distances or for taking it off-road like we do our adventure bikes. So what they need to do is increase the stroke. Now, they have stepped up to the plate a little bit in that this engine, they have now put in the Ninja 500, the Ninja 500 and the Z500. Now, why they're calling them a 500, I don't know. They're a 450 engine, but they're telling a big lie on that. When they first released this bike in 2023 in Japan, they had the Ninja 400 engine in it, and that was the 399cc engine. They had not increased the stroke yet, but those only sold in Japan. When they released them to the rest of the world, they increased the stroke, and they became Eliminator 400/500, because the very first year they were 400s, but only in Japan. So you will see a lot of mention in other countries, like Romania, that they're called the Eliminator 500, or they may be called the 400/500. But in the United States, and on Kawasaki's official website, they just call them the Eliminator. When you go searching for accessories for it, like T-Rex, for instance, they call it the Eliminator 450, which is exactly what it is. So that's my beef about the engine size not being called correctly around the world. It's a 450 engine. It's not a 500. So I put the T-Rex rear rack on this, and then I put my little homemade larger rack on top of it so that I could put my KLR bag on it, because I love these large KLR bags. They unzip at the bottom here, and then they become a lot taller if you need more room. And they've got pockets on both sides, instead of, like most of the back bags, like the Nelson rig, they've got a nice round top, but you fill that up with an internal pocket. So that takes up a lot of space. But these have a nice tall top, so that you can put a helmet in there, but your extra storage is on the outside, which is what Nelson rigs should be doing to their little bags. And I have 3 of those Nelson rig bags, but they do lack any outside storage. I also put my strobe brake light on it. And I put a safety strobe on the front. It has all LD lighting. I have an Atlas throttle lock. don't know if you're familiar with those, but you turn the throttle on, push the lock button, hold your throttle, release it with the other button. The biggest complaint that I hear online about these bikes is the fact that the mirrors are so short that you can only see your biceps. You can't see out past your arms. So Amazon sells a lot of different mirror extenders. So I put mirror extenders on it. T-Rex also makes a very nice center stand for it. And because these don't have the lugs underneath to add a center stand that you can buy on Amazon, like you can on some bikes, like the Kawasaki Versus X300, for instance, T-Rex had to design a completely new mounting system. You remove the foot peg and that big plate mounts up underneath there. It's an engineering marvel is what it is, and it's height adjustable. I have it sitting pretty low to the ground because I only need it to check the oil and the chain, and you can see that when it's on the center stand, you can check the oil. And I just changed the oil. I did my 600 miles, and I changed the oil on it yesterday. It is a water-cooled engine, stainless steel exhaust, single exhaust, twin cylinder. The radiator's a little ugly on it. I think they could have made a little bit smaller radiator. That's a T-Rex windshield. And again, they went to great lengths to develop a very, actually kind of a complicated bend to go to natural points on the motorcycle. Use one on each side on your upper fork and one on each side of the dash module. Of course, I also have my outside thermometer mounted on the handlebar and grip puppies on the grips. T-Rex also makes a real nice luggage rack that mounts in place of this rather worthless passenger pillion. So I think I'm going to put that on there just because I'll never use the passenger pillion, and I think that that luggage rack on there looks pretty cool. So that'll be my next purchase. I put a louder horn on it, like I do most of my bikes. And that about covers all of that. Now, one thing that I haven't heard too much complaint about, and that is the fact that this has such a short travel in the rear. I think it's 3.1 inches. And because of that, they have to use a pretty stiff spring. And even with it on the lowest setting, a 130-pound guy like me gets a pretty stiff ride out of it. This bike could be more perfect if it had a longer travel suspension so that they could put lighter springs on it, and then heavier guys could just crank it up to more preload. But it'll take a 160-pound guy probably to add any preload to this to get the spring to work properly. I don't weigh enough to compress that heavy spring, so I feel a lot more of the rolled jars and bumps. And the only saving grace is the saddle. It comes with a 28.9-inch seat height. And I have a 32-inch inseam. But Kawasaki makes two other seat heights. They make a 27.9 and they make a 30.1. So I bought the 30.1, and the 28.9 that it comes with really helps absorb the road bumps. But this one is more plush, and it does a much better job. I would say it improves it another 50%. So they're not cheap. They're $240, $50. But any aftermarket seat is always expensive. And a lot of them, like Seat Concepts, you have to unstaple the seat and take the seat cover off and the foam off and put their foam and seat cover on and staple it back on again, which for a lot of guys often means a trip to an upholstery shop. But at least for about the same price that Seat Concepts gets for their seats, Kawasaki will sell you an entire snap-in seat. The seat comes off on the side case here. So you turn the key, lift the seat, and under the seat you have a little hook here to put your helmet on, but I don't like that because you have to take the whole seat off every time you want to do that. So I installed a regular helmet lock on it, which is something that motorcycle manufacturers have pretty much quit doing on most bikes nowadays. They must think that we don't wear helmets or something, or never leave our bikes with the helmets. But anyway, that's what they're doing now. And so you've got to come up with your own ideas. One of the other complaints that I often hear online is the fact that because this is a 180-degree engine, it's the smoothest engine you can get. The Kawasaki W650 and W800 had a 360-degree engine, and that is the most vibrating design of engine you could possibly ever think of. So the 270-degree engine is kind of a compromise. It's not the smoothest engine, but it supposedly delivers a little more torque than a 360 or a 180. And it has a little better sound, a little more manly, burble, or rumble. The 360 also has a good rumble in their twins, but in the parallel twins, the 180-degree engine is the smoothest. And because of that, it also has the smoothest sounding exhaust. So it's not going to thrill you to listen to this run like it does some motorcycles. It's just very smooth. Here you can see the tachometer, which is another one of my complaints, in that it only jumps in 500 RPM increments. Now on the Honda CB300R, you can adjust that to any amount you want, including 100 RPM increments. And so this one, you can change speed about 3 to 4 miles an hour before you actually see a change in the tachometer. So anywhere between, say, 58 mile an hour and 61 mile an hour, or 62, is going to give you the same 5,000 RPMs on the tachometer. The speedometer is off by about 3 miles an hour. It's high, like most bikes are today. It does have, you see the Bluetooth flashing on it. There's an app you can download for your phone, and it will keep track of your rides and the miles on the bike and a whole bunch of mostly unimportant stuff, unless you really like to keep track of your rides when you go out. The fuel gauge is really weird. It's got a big section when it's full. And when you've got about, 60 miles on it or so, it drops that whole big section. And then you start working on little sections. And of course, they go much quicker toward the end because this is such a small tank. You can figure about 180 miles before you need gas on this tank, or between 160 and 180, depending on if you're driving 80 miles an hour on the interstate or 50 to 60 miles an hour on back roads. So the range is not great. It also has, that's on trip, there's trip B. There's your mile per gallon, instant mile per gallon. Then you have your average mile per gallon. That's off about 3 mile per gallon. So it's, if it says you're getting 82, you're probably getting 84 or 85. I'm actually doing pretty well on this tank of gas. I think I'll end up averaging over 80 miles to the gallon. And I was on the interstate with it today doing 80 miles an hour. It's got your range, which only shows up when the motor's running, and your odometer. Okay, you've heard my complaints and the things that I like about it. Is this the perfect motorcycle? Well, it might be. It gets good gas mileage for a 450cc bike, and it's very comfortable to ride. It's got a little stiff suspension because of the short stroke on the rear suspension, but the saddle is a gem, and it absorbs most of the road abrasions. It's got a slipper clutch, hydraulically assisted, so it's got a very light clutch. Kawasaki has really been putting a lot of light clutches on their bike. The Versys X300 is just a one-finger clutch. You can ride them in the city all day long, stoplight after stoplight, and your wrist or fingers will never get tired of clutching these new Kawasaki's. They have the lightest clutch on the market. Salesman told me that they're putting much lighter springs in them, but I think it probably has something to do with hydraulic assist. Although they're light when they're sitting still and the engine's not running, so the hydraulics isn't helping it then, but it is a hydraulically assisted slipper clutch. So it's got a lot of features that I really like on it. It's considered a cruiser with a sport bike attitude. It sits more like a standard bike than it does a cruiser, because most cruisers have forward controls, and standard bikes and adventure bikes and a few others, enduros, have the foot pegs under your knees, and that's where this one is. Sport bikes, you gotta put your feet behind your knees. So this is in the middle. It's more like an adventure bike or a standard. It sits more like an adventure bike or a standard, a little bit lower than either of those. So you're sitting lower like a cruiser. And the whole thing is just really comfortable. Now, I did put handlebar risers and setbacks. Because I like the handlebar closer to me. You can see that the universal ones don't fit 100% because there's the gap right down here. These have a very deep handlebar mount. And these mount risers that are universal on the internet do not fill that in. It doesn't make any difference because your bolts are what holds it anyway. That has nothing to do with it unless you're putting the handlebar in that slot. But they're not a perfect fit. But they do bring the handlebars up and back towards me, which makes it easier to stand up on it if you are coming to a large bump that you see coming. Whereas if you have the forward controls like a cruiser, you cannot stand up on those controls. You've got to have the foot pegs underneath you to be able to stand up. So you can stand up on this. And if you raise the handlebars, it makes it much easier to stand up on it if you're going to be going on some gravel roads that are full of washboards or something like that. But you can stand up and ride this. So it's kind of a universal bike. It can take the place of light adventure bike like dirt trails and dirt roads, but don't expect to take it on any jumps or deep sand or anything like that. It's a city commuter bike, urban bike, and you can take long trips on it because it's very comfortable and has plenty of power. So I hope you enjoyed this overview of the new Kawasaki Eliminator. If you have any questions, post them in the comments. I always get back to you. Thank you. In case you were wondering what I had covered up in my garage in my motorcycle video, it's my electronic drum set. And you can change it to many different sounds. There's the brand name on it. Nitro Drum Module. And you've got about 40 different drum sets that you can change the sounds to. And I use a Donner amplifier.